I thought that downloading a dating app would just help me feel desired again in my boring marriage. What I didn't know was that my husband had created a fake profile to seduce me, recorded all our intimate sessions, and was planning to expose everything to 50,000 viewers on his live stream. The night before I was supposed to meet Marcus, the man from the dating app who had become my escape from reality, David announced he was doing a special stream. I had told David I was visiting my sister for the weekend, but really I was planning to drive 2 hours to meet the man who made me feel alive again. David's announcement wasn't unusual. He occasionally did themed nights or special events to engage his audience, but something about his demeanor was different. He seemed excited in a way I hadn't seen in months, almost giddy. I was in our bedroom, packing my bag for the weekend with Marcus, when I heard David start his stream downstairs. His voice carried through the house as he greeted his audience with unusual enthusiasm. He said he had something special planned, a social experiment that his viewers were going to find very interesting. But let me back up and explain how I got to this moment. Because the whole story is important if you want to understand how a boring Tuesday night turned into the worst moment of my life. David and I had been married for 8 years. No kids, just us and our careers. He worked as a software engineer during the day and ran a moderately successful Twitch channel at night, streaming games and commentary to about 15,000 regular followers. I worked in marketing for a tech startup. We were what people called a power couple, successful, attractive, financially stable. From the outside, everything looked perfect. But inside our marriage, things had been dying slowly for years. The romance had faded somewhere around year 5, replaced by comfortable routines and predictable conversations about work, bills, and weekend plans. We rarely touched anymore, except for the occasional perfunctory kiss goodbye in the morning. Our sex life had become practically non-existent, maybe once a month if we were both in the mood and remembered to make an effort. I'd brought up couples therapy multiple times, but David always brushed it off. He seemed content with our roommate-like existence, buried in his games and his growing online following. I felt invisible, unwanted, like I was slowly disappearing into the beige walls of our perfectly decorated house. The breaking point came on a Friday night in early March. I'd made dinner reservations at a new restaurant downtown, hoping to surprise David with a romantic evening. When I got home from work, excited to tell him about my plans, I found him in his streaming room with his headset on, completely absorbed in his game. He held up one finger when he saw me, indicating he'd be done in a minute, but that minute turned into 3 hours. I ate leftover Chinese food alone, while listening to him laugh and joke with his chat, being more animated and engaged than he'd been with me in months. That's when it hit me. He was more intimate with thousands of strangers online than he was with his own wife. My friend Jessica had been divorced for 2 years and was always telling me stories about her adventures on dating apps. She'd joke about how I was missing out on all the excitement, how dating had evolved into this immediate gratification world where you could feel desired and wanted with just a swipe. I'd always laughed it off, but that night something inside me snapped. I downloaded Tinder while David was still streaming. At first, I told myself it was just curiosity. I wasn't going to actually meet anyone or do anything inappropriate. I just wanted to see what was out there, to feel attractive to someone again. I carefully crafted a profile using photos from 2 years ago when I was 10 pounds lighter and had just gotten highlights. I didn't use my real name. Instead, I went with Sarah, my middle name. The matches started almost immediately. It was intoxicating. Message after message from men telling me I was beautiful, asking about my interests, trying to make me laugh. For the first time in years, I felt desirable. These men were actually listening to me, asking follow-up questions, remembering details from previous conversations. It was everything my marriage wasn't. I started staying up late, chatting with various matches, while David streamed. The conversations were harmless at first, talking about work, hobbies, favourite movies. But gradually, some of them became more flirtatious. I found myself looking forward to these interactions more than anything else in my day. Then Marcus appeared. His profile was mysterious. Only 2 photos, both slightly blurry, showing a tall, athletic man with dark hair. His bio was simple, looking for real conversation with an intelligent woman. Something about the minimalism intrigued me. When we matched, his first message wasn't the typical "Hey, beautiful" I'd gotten used to. Instead, he wrote a thoughtful comment about a book I'd mentioned loving in my profile, a relatively obscure novel that most people hadn't read. Our conversation was immediately different. Marcus seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts and opinions. He asked about my work and actually understood the technical aspects of digital marketing when I explained them. He shared stories about his job in consulting that were funny and engaging. Most importantly, he made me feel intelligent and appreciated in a way David hadn't in years. We talked every day for 2 weeks, with conversations that would go on for hours. Marcus had a way of drawing out thoughts and feelings I'd forgotten I had. He asked about my dreams, my frustrations, what made me happy. When I mentioned feeling unappreciated in my marriage, he didn't push for details, but simply said he couldn't understand how anyone could take someone like me for granted. It should have been a red flag that he knew exactly what to say, that his responses always hit the perfect emotional note. But I was so starved for attention and validation that I didn't question it. I was falling for him through text messages, creating an entire fantasy relationship with someone I'd never met. The conversations gradually became more personal, then more intimate. Marcus had a way of making everything feel natural and unforced. When he told me I was beautiful, it didn't feel like a line. When he said he couldn't stop thinking about me, I believed him completely. He made me feel like the most fascinating woman in the world. After 3 weeks of constant messaging, Marcus suggested we move to video chat. I was nervous but excited. We arranged to call on a Thursday evening when David would be streaming. I spent an hour getting ready, choosing the right lighting, making sure I looked perfect. The video call was everything I'd hoped for and more. Marcus was even more attractive than his photos suggested, with kind eyes and an easy smile that made me feel immediately comfortable. We talked for 2 hours about everything and nothing. He complimented my appearance in a way that felt genuine rather than sleazy. By the end of the call, I was completely smitten. Our relationship escalated quickly after that. Video calls became a regular occurrence, always scheduled around David's streaming times. Marcus had a way of making me feel beautiful and desired that I'd forgotten was possible. He would tell me how much he missed me between our calls, how he thought about me during his workday, how lucky any man would be to have me in his life. It was during our 4th video call that things became physical. Marcus told me how beautiful I looked, how much he wished he could touch me. The combination of his words and the months of feeling invisible in my marriage broke down my resistance. What started as innocent flirtation quickly became something much more intimate. I'm not proud of what happened next, but I need to be honest about it. Over the course of 2 weeks, Marcus and I had several video sessions that were decidedly not innocent. I did things I'd never done before, said things that would have mortified me under normal circumstances, but Marcus made it all feel safe and exciting. He was patient and encouraging, making me feel sexy and confident in a way I hadn't experienced in years. Looking back, I should have noticed how perfectly he played to my insecurities. When I worried about my appearance, he had exactly the right reassurance. When I felt guilty about David, he had the perfect argument for why I deserved to feel good about myself. He seemed to understand my psychology better than I understood it myself. The plan was for us to meet in person. Marcus suggested a weekend trip to a resort about 2 hours away, somewhere we could spend real time together without worrying about being seen. I was terrified and excited in equal measure. I'd never cheated on David physically, and I wasn't sure I could go through with it. But I was desperate to meet this man who had become the most important part of my day. I made arrangements to visit my sister for the weekend, lying to David about needing some girl time. He barely looked up from his computer when I told him, just nodded, and said he hoped I had fun. His indifference stung, but it also made my decision feel more justified. That brings me back to that night, when everything changed forever. I was only half paying attention to David's stream as I folded clothes and tried to calm my nerves about the next day. His streams were background noise to me by this point. I had my phone in my hand, rereading my last conversation with Marcus, when I heard David say something that made my blood freeze. He was reading our messages. Word for word, he was reading aloud the intimate conversations I'd been having with Marcus for the past month. I dropped my phone and ran to the top of the stairs. listening in horror as my husband shared my most private moments with his audience. He wasn't just reading the romantic parts. He was sharing everything. The complaints about our marriage, the intimate details of our video calls, even descriptions of the physical things I'd done on camera. My hands were shaking as I crept down the stairs, afraid to confront him but unable to stay away. Through the crack in his streaming room door, I could see his monitor. His usual game was minimized, replaced by screenshots of our conversations. But worse than that, much worse, was what I saw next. He was showing them video clips. Somehow, Marcus had been recording our intimate video calls, and David was playing them for his audience. Clips of me in various states of undress, saying things that were meant to be private between two people, were being broadcast to over 50,000 viewers. The chat was exploding with comments. Some people were shocked, others were laughing, many were making crude jokes about my appearance and behavior. I watched in real time as my most intimate moments became entertainment for strangers. That's when I realized the truth that destroyed me completely. David's voice was different as he addressed his audience. He was explaining his social experiment, talking about trust and fidelity in relationships. But it was his tone that gave him away. The same cadence, the same inflections I'd fallen in love with over the past month. Marcus was David. My husband had created a fake profile, spent weeks romancing me, convinced me to trust him with my deepest feelings and most private moments. Also, he could humiliate me in front of his entire audience. I burst through the door of his streaming room, screaming for him to stop, to turn off the stream, to delete the videos. But David just looked at me with cold satisfaction. He told his audience that this was what happened when people couldn't be trusted, when someone was willing to betray their marriage vows for a stranger online. The stream continued for another hour while I begged him to stop. He showed more screenshots, more video clips, even read some of my text messages where I'd complained about our sex life and his emotional unavailability. Every private thought I'd shared with who I thought was Marcus was now public entertainment. By the time the stream ended, the damage was complete. Clips had already been saved and shared across social media platforms. Screenshots of our conversations were being turned into memes. My face and body were being shared in ways I'd never consented to, attached to comments and jokes that made me want to disappear forever. David explained his methodology like he was presenting a case study. He'd created the Marcus profile specifically to test my loyalty. He'd used information about my interests and insecurities, gathered from 8 years of marriage, to craft the perfect persona to seduce me. Every message Marcus had sent was designed to exploit my specific vulnerabilities. He'd been planning this for months, he told me. He'd noticed me staying up late on my phone and had suspected I might be talking to other men. Instead of confronting me directly, he'd decided to prove my untrustworthiness by giving me the perfect opportunity to demonstrate it. The worst part was his justification. He claimed he was doing a public service, showing people how easy it was for spouses to be unfaithful online. He positioned himself as the victim and me as the villain, despite the fact that he'd orchestrated the entire situation. The aftermath was swift and devastating. The videos went viral within hours. My real name was discovered by internet detectives who recognized landmarks in the background of my photos. My employer found out about the situation before I could even attempt to explain it. I was fired by email the next morning with a note about maintaining company image and values. My family was mortified. My parents, who had always been proud of my marriage and career, couldn't understand how I'd gotten involved in such a public scandal. Friends stopped calling, either out of embarrassment or judgment. The few who reached out wanted details about the situation, rather than offering genuine support. David filed for divorce immediately, using the videos and messages as evidence of adultery. His lawyer painted a picture of a faithless wife who had betrayed her loving husband's trust. My lawyer advised me to settle quickly and quietly, as fighting would only prolong the public attention and humiliation. The financial implications were severe. David kept the house, most of our savings, and his streaming income, which had actually increased substantially due to the publicity from his social experiment. I was left with my car, some personal belongings, and enough money to rent a small apartment across town. But the financial losses were nothing compared to the social destruction. The videos and screenshots continued to circulate months later. My image was used in articles about infidelity, in YouTube reaction videos, in discussions about the dangers of social media. I became a cautionary tale, a meme, a symbol of unfaithful wives everywhere. I had to move to a different city and change my name professionally to find work. Even then, potential employers would sometimes recognize me during interviews, leading to awkward conversations about my past and its relevance to their company culture. The psychological impact was perhaps the worst part of all. David had systematically exploited my deepest insecurities and vulnerabilities, then exposed them to the world as entertainment. He'd made me fall in love with a fictional version of himself, then used that love to destroy me publicly. I spent months in therapy trying to understand what had happened and how to move forward. My therapist helped me see that while I was responsible for my choices, David's actions were manipulative and cruel, in ways that went far beyond normal relationship conflicts. The hardest thing to accept was that David had never been trying to save our marriage or address our problems. If he'd been genuinely concerned about my loyalty or our relationship, he could have suggested counseling or simply talked to me about his fears. Instead, he'd chosen to create an elaborate trap designed to make me fail, then humiliate me as punishment for failing. I learned that several of his streaming friends had known about his plan in advance. They'd helped him research techniques for creating convincing fake profiles and had encouraged him to document everything for content. What I'd experienced as a genuine emotional connection had been a collaborative effort to create viral entertainment at my expense. The legal system offered no recourse. Revenge porn laws didn't apply because David was my husband, and I had technically consented to being recorded, even though I'd been deceived about the identity of the person I was talking to. The videos were considered his property as much as mine, giving him the right to share them. Some people online defended David's actions, calling him creative and justified in exposing a cheating wife. Others criticized his methods while still maintaining that I'd deserved some kind of consequence for my behavior. Very few people seemed to grasp the psychological manipulation involved in his scheme. I tried to rebuild my life slowly and quietly. I found work at a small non-profit where my past was less likely to follow me. I moved to an apartment in a neighborhood where nobody knew my story. I deleted all my social media accounts and avoided online spaces where my videos might surface. But the damage was permanent in ways I'm still discovering. Dating became impossible. Any potential partner could easily find the most intimate details of my past with a simple internet search. Trust became nearly impossible when I knew how easily someone could deceive me online. The worst moments came when I would temporarily forget what had happened and feel a moment of normalcy, only to be reminded by a stranger's recognition or a new comment on an old video. The internet never forgets, and neither do the people who were entertained by my humiliation. David continued streaming and actually built his audience significantly after the controversy. He occasionally referenced the situation in his content, always positioning himself as someone who'd been wronged but had handled it cleverly. He never acknowledged the psychological manipulation involved in his scheme or the disproportionate nature of his revenge. I wanted people to understand that while I made mistakes, what David did was something far worse than cheating. He spent months planning my destruction, using intimate knowledge of my psychology to manipulate me into giving him exactly the evidence he needed to ruin my life. He turned our marriage into content, our private problems into public entertainment. The question I'm left with is whether there's any mistake serious enough to justify that level of calculated cruelty. I betrayed David's trust, but he betrayed something deeper. He betrayed my fundamental belief that the person who knew me best wouldn't use that knowledge to destroy me. I still wonder if David planned this as revenge for something specific, or if it was just the culmination of years of resentment about our failing marriage. Maybe he blamed me for the distance between us, or maybe he'd wanted out for a long time and was looking for a justifiable way to leave me with nothing. The internet gave David the tools to destroy me more completely than would have been possible in any previous generation. But it also gave him an audience that would reward him for doing it. Maybe that's the most depressing part of all. That so many people found entertainment in the calculated destruction of another person's life. My marriage was broken, and I made choices that broke it further. But David's response wasn't justice. It was cruelty dressed up as entertainment, and the internet rewarded him for it with more fame and money than he'd ever had before. Before you go, please hit that like button. Subscribe for more real-life stories like this one, and don't forget to ring the notification bell so you'll be the first to hear the next story.